Hello and welcome to another alternate media special. We've got something, special for you tonight. So my compatriot Seamus is not able to make it tonight, so we're gonna have a special guest on. I'm gonna be joined tonight by our social media manager, Scott Councilman. Let's bring him on. There we are.
Hey. What's
Mr.
up, man?
Councilman, how are you tonight?
Doing pretty good. What about yourself?
I'm doing well. So for those of you who don't know, whenever you're interacting on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, especially the one who makes all of the shorts that you see on YouTube, this is the guy right here. He's the one who puts in the hard work for that.
This is me getting all those watermarks off.
Right, because I know nothing about watermarks. I'm computer illiterate most of the time. So this is kind of we chose this topic because this is one that you and I had actually discussed, even maybe starting your own segment to kind of discuss, which is what to expect when coming down this path. So when coming to Torah, there's a number of different experiences that people may have from church, family. There's a lot of baggage, a lot of conversations that will be had, and we'll get to that in a moment. First and foremost, we do have a giveaway to announce. So last month was the book by Paul Philip Levertov. We gave away Love in the Messianic Age. Wonderful book. But this month, our giveaway is Paul Was Not a Christian. Another excellent book.
Great book.
So all it takes to put your name in the drawing is to be a Patreon supporter or a supporter on the website. We keep a list of both, where we're not quite in the phase of transitioning completely from Patreon yet. So the website and Patreon are both active. Patreon memberships start as low as $1. So, definitely if you wanted to be a supporter of the ministry, that allows you a number of privileges, like being in the book drawing and having access to the after partes, which we'll be doing after this. But to get to our main topic, and you have a pretty unique perspective on this, because how long would you say you've been in the walk at this point?
You know what? I'm gonna have to stop you. I'm a little disappointed right now.
Uh-oh.
We didn't go over our drinks.
You've caught me. Oh man.
As you're taking the sip.
I was already taking a sip. Yeah, well, see, I'm taking a sip because I'm drinking the same thing that I have been for the past 2 weeks. But what do you have, sir?
I am having good old Angel's Envy. And you can't really see that, but
good choice.
So that's what I'm having tonight.
I found out the other day.
That's a couple of months.
I found out the other day that Matt Walsh is sponsored by Angel's Envy.
Really?
Yeah, so it just made me like it even more.
I did not know that. That is definitely interesting.
Right. Oh, so
now I'm ready.
Right. Now we're ready. Now, again, like I was asking about, how long do you think you've been in the walk at this point?
Oh, I was trying to think about the day. I think about 3 or 4 years in between.
I was gonna say, I think you've been to. Yeah, I think you've been to. It's like 3 Passovers now, right?
Yeah. I save. I think I save a wine bottle from each Passover.
Oh, so wow, that's a really neat tradition.
Helps me keep count.
It's a really cool tradition. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
So you remember much better than I do at this point what it was like first hearing about Torah, and I know it sounds pretty crazy at first. Usually it's one of those things where you're like, well, I don't know, I'm not sure about it.
That's exactly my reaction. Because okay, so I came from a Presbyterian background, small family church, things like that. So obviously asking questions, not really getting those questions. But then, was we meet at a fair or something like that?
It was it was a local. It's fascinating how we met. Actually,
It was
it
our
was
wives.
a local festival. Yeah, it's the seafood festival that they hold like 3 towns over. But it's close enough to where it's like a half-hour drive to be there, and they've got fun rides and stuff. And yeah, so no, our wives actually knew one another
Yeah.
via business, and just decided to have a out and a double date. And so I'll meet this guy. I can't promise we'll get along, but if he's chill, then it'll be cool.
And then you
we
walk
hit
up
it
with a
off right
Breaking
away,
Benjamin
which is
shirt, and you
awesome.
had my heart.
Right. It's the Breaking Benjamin shirt is always the dead giveaway.
It is. It is. But after that, man, like you invited me out to a Bible session because we were looking, obviously, at that time, not really like fulfilled with the churches that we've been to, and kind of got drove away from that. So I go and meet both of you guys, you and Seamus, and we're sitting there, and you're talking, and as I'm hearing you talk, it makes sense. It makes sense. And then I leave the group that night, and I look at Angelica, and I'm like, man, they sound like they're practicing Judaism. I was like, I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure what's happening. But I was like, it sounds right. And it made sense. And so we went back, obviously. And I think finally I asked you guys, like, what's y'all's belief? What's the core belief? And y'all finally came out and just laid it all out there. And it was definitely interesting. And it's the first phase that I kind of laid out like a rough draft of some phases. And what I call it like dipping curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of dip your toe in the water to get a feel for it.
Right.
But something's going to make you jump all in. You just gotta keep easing down into the water. And that's kind of what happened with you guys, is that it all made sense. I couldn't find anything wrong. Even the questions that I came at you, I was like, okay, I've never thought about it that way. From like a cultural, historical perspective. Nobody has ever taught that. To me, anyway. So, learning that from you guys definitely opened my eyes. And that's kind of how I kind of just didn't really jump full force, but definitely kept coming back to ask more questions. And you actually were able to answer the questions that some of these church pastors, priests were not able to answer directly towards me. But y'all were able to answer directly with confidence and then back that up. And that's what I enjoyed.
Yeah, I remember one of those particular discussions. Matter of fact, I remember the distinct one where you were like, all right, guys, just like tell me what it is, right?
Yeah, I was like,
we're kind of beating around the bush on certain things because, like, it's like it's a new friendship, and like we're getting to know each other, and I didn't want to scare you away because there are certain conversations which you know now via personal experience
yes.
are they're very fiery and they get that way quick, and so yeah, no, I remember kind of just breaking down and be like, look, we're not Trinitarian, like. And it gave a brief explanation of why, and you were like, "Man, that makes sense."
Yeah, because I remember y'all said that, and y'all wanted like a response from me, and I was like, "Yeah, okay." Like, I was never explained the Trinity ever. They're just like, "Oh, he is," and I was like, "But why? Like, how? Like, how does that make sense? Like, can I get logical reasoning behind that?" And they're just like, "It just says it," and I was like, "Okay, where?" And again, I mean, they pointed the obvious passages that you see, mostly from John.
Of course.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, but that doesn't really explain it. Like, And then I was like, well, the Holy Spirit's missing, so where we're going with that? So,
Right.
but yeah, I just remember y'all doing, like it almost seemed like everybody froze at that time.
Yeah.
But yeah,
We were waiting for the response that we usually get, and well, you didn't give it.
Yeah.
Which is man, that actually speaks a lot. How a person actually responds to both the topic of the Trinity and the topic of the Torah. You know,
Yeah.
the Torah is always kind of the starter, and you know, we can delve into the Trinity a little later, but because Torah is the initiating process in down this path, and learning a new perspective, or really not even a new perspective, it's a much older perspective, but it's new information to us. A couple of the experiences that are very common, usually are going to be, you know, negative. So like what to expect from, I would say initially, probably church family, right?
Church family, because obviously you're probably going to bring up that issue, especially early stage. So are you talking about like going like at the church? Because at that time I really wasn't a part of a church.
Right.
So
Right.
But I can only assume that you will discuss these topics with them, and you're going to probably have some combativeness there, even like to the point of argumentative and name calling. I mean, I've experienced that right off the bat, just from like maybe not family, but groups that I'm a part of.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that I notice is pretty common, and this is especially if you're already in a well-established church family, which so your experience is unique in that the church was pressuring you to become members of the church.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I did forget about that. Yeah.
But initially, you know, and the reason I begin with your church family, you know, what to expect from them is because they will typically be the first people exposed to it, outside of like obviously your immediate family. But this is typically a path, generally, that a family will choose to go on. Occasionally, it'll be an individual within an immediate family, but I know for me, it was the whole family kind of went this way. And initially, you'll be tested by church members. And by tested, I mean they will try and reason with you one way or another, or they may try and push and
dissuade you.
You know, yeah, or you know, maybe they'll prepare a meal for the church potluck that they know is not going to be kosher, and they're testing to see if, you know, if you've got any inconsistencies, or if they can trip you up or something like that. That's a weird one. It's very strange to have that much of an obsession to try and get somebody to eat something they're trying not to eat.
Right. Yeah, I've definitely had that a couple of times. And also I would say, man, what happened? They would use Jesus as the point, like, oh, well, that's why he came.
Right.
And yeah. And then at that point, you're probably just learning. And so you'll come out with like Matthew 5:17. And then they'll try to reason with that as well. If you don't know, like if you haven't really studied it, because like I said, you're just new, it could dissuade you. But that's why I always tell people, like, just make sure you keep studying and having these conversations. That's the whole point, is to make you sharper and have that discussion with yourself. And I mean, this is why God gave you this that logical thinking process.
Yep. And I think too, you know, not being afraid to have the conversations.
Right.
I know. So when my dad chose to lead the family down this path, a few of the church elders of the church that we were going to at the time actually called him to try and dispute the matter with him. And this is after a little bit of testing from just your average church members. Now the church elders are calling the family. Wow. And I believe the words were, because he wanted to have a meeting with my dad and discuss the matter. And the words were, well, you can bring your Bible and I'll bring mine, and I believe that I can prove my point from the Bible better than you can prove yours. That was the attempt to try and convince my dad to have a conversation, which is not the way to convince him to have a conversation.
No.
But all be that as it may, I think personally it's useful to have those conversations regardless, even if you know that you're not going to change that person's mind then and there. You don't know what they're going to think about in the future,
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
I personally have seen the results of some of these same conversations my dad had with certain of influential people in the church now 15 years later, and their position has completely changed on certain things.
Yeah, I think because you plant that seed, and I think it does grow over time. If they're really genuinely trying to understand, and get more involved into the word, and then they start reading these passages, and they're like, "Oh my God, I had no idea that's what it said."
Right.
And they just get it from a different point of view. That's all. It's just a mind shift. That's
Right.
all it is. Yeah.
It's learning to reshape your worldview.
Hmm.
And that's why I think it's always worthwhile to have a conversation, is because they may not be ready now, but their worldview may shift drastically at some point in the future, and maybe they'll remember that conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, people change, especially if they're trying to grow.
Right. The next thing that I know many have experienced is being preached at from the pulpit. Which that's usually in the final phases, right? Usually that's the point at which people are like, all right, we're not going to this church anymore. They're going to preach at me from the pulpit like this. We're done.
Yeah.
Which is followed by the phase of being shunned by the church community, which means that you're the talk of the town, right? It means that these people are constantly talking about you behind your back.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I think we left before I could experience that one because of what I told the guy. He's like, you're gonna join the church and you're gonna learn this doctrine, our church doctrine. And my question to him was, well, isn't the Bible your doctrine? Like that should be your doctrine. I mean, I don't know why we have different. That was another thing I didn't understand, was just the 6-hour class that I had to take on the weekend. I didn't take it, obviously, but I didn't understand that. They're a nice group. I mean, I'm not going to talk bad. They're a really good group. But that part I didn't understand, and I felt like a lot of pressure with that, and that's when I just kind of like drifted away, because that's about the time I met you guys, and you were making a whole lot more sense, and then just kind of broke away completely. So
Yep. And yeah, like I said, that usually that'll be the ending phase, and hopefully, people are spared from it. And that's kind of also what we're here for, is to some of these are unavoidable scenarios, but some of them might be avoidable. It depends on how you approach, and understand that every circumstance depends on how you approach it.
it's how you leave it too. And
Yep.
that was like, so my first phase was dipping curiosity. Once you get in there and you start learning, and we're kind of going through it right now, the second phase is that resentment and anger. You feel lied to through your whole life, especially if you're me. I'm 34, so I started this at 30. You're talking about 30 years of like church tradition that I got, a family tradition that I got to undo and rewire. It's not going to happen overnight. So yeah, there's a lot of resentment and anger, but you have to control that and understand that they also don't know what you know.
Right.
Most of them, like maybe the teachers, they should, but even them, they're kind of in their own little echo chamber, and not. I would say most of them should, but I haven't been to school like that, so I don't know.
And I feel like a lot of that too, that phase of anger and resentment, and that goes with anything, So
Yeah.
I know my father grew up Catholic, and then when he was introduced to evangelical Christianity, and he became a believer at that point. He felt the same way about Catholicism. It just a lot of anger about being lied to, at least from his perspective and his vantage point on what Catholicism had taught him. And so then there was going through that all over again when coming to Torah out of evangelical Christianity. And a lot of people get caught in what's called what we call the cage stage, right?
Yeah.
Because in that anger, you feel like it's your your sworn righteous duty to go out and
smite people.
Everybody, right? Everybody who is not doing what you know now to be correct, and everybody who is fallen into some of the lies that normative church doctrine has spun, and at that point, the motive is not right. And a lot of times you still don't know enough to actually have that conversation.
No, and you're not going to get very far, and they're going to shut you off, just like you would shut them off if they called you a Judaizer. You're not going to get very far if you're like, oh, you're a pagan worshiper. They don't see themselves as that way. And I ultimately don't see them that way either. It's just what they're taught, and they just don't know what they don't know. And we're all that. We constantly should be learning and sharpening ourselves with discussion.
And that's why we call it the cage stage, is because it's like you're at this point in life where really you need to be kept in a cage so that you don't go out and do damage to your own reputation, do damage to your friendships and relationships with family. And this kind of goes along with another phase of leaving the church, which is being sought as a teacher, right? Part of leaving a church family is that because you have now discovered something that the average Christian doesn't know, some of the members of that church may seek you out as some kind of a teacher to follow out of the church. At that point, again, even though you've learned a little bit, it's still not enough to qualify you as a teacher, right? That's you're still a student learning at this point.
Yeah, that's I actually just had somebody ask me if I could lead a Bible study group like 3 weeks ago. And I was like, awesome, no. Dude. I was like, there's no way. I was like, I don't know enough. I'm not where I want to be. And I know it's a journey, but I turned it down. I was honored. But at this time I was like, maybe later in the future, let me just get things rolling down here. But it kind of leads into the third stage I call is the holier than thou stage.
Yeah.
It's because now you're out of that anger, resentment, but now you think you have all the knowledge.
Right.
And so you go out here and talk to everybody and anybody, and some of that anger still hasn't left you. So if the conversation doesn't drift the way you want it to be, or however you go, so you still can present that anger towards the end. I mean, I know I have, and gotten better about it. I try to keep that under wraps for the most part, but I'm sure everybody goes. But I think that's a pivotal stage. You either stay there, and which I think some people do. I think it's about 50-50 split. You either stay there and you don't really test yourself anymore, or you go into the self-realization of lack of knowledge stage.
Yes. And that's the humbling stage. And you're absolutely right. So there's a lot of people who never get out of the cage stage. They never get out of the holier than thou stage. And those two are kind of part of the same phase, like you said. Especially after another, and I would say this is a broader sweeping stage, is the knee-jerk defense phase, right? Because when you go through this transition, and every time that you have an encounter with a former church member that you were friends with, and this is a good time to introduce this one, right? Expectations from your family and friends, right? Anytime that you meet with family who disagree with you, or a friend who disagrees with you, it turns into an argument. And so it ultimately comes to a place where somebody who might genuinely be curious to ask you, and they ask you a question, but your knee-jerk reaction is dukes up like I'm ready to have a theological debate right now. And that's a hard phase to come out of, and a lot of people never leave it. I know for me, it was really hard to come out of that phase.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, because that I've definitely had that. I'm like, getting into my crouching tiger, hidden dragon pose real quick.
They just ask you a simple question about why you don't eat pork, and suddenly you're thinking about all these theological notes that you've gone over.
Yeah, and simply it's just been like, it's just my religious beliefs, and they're like, oh, okay.
and sometimes it really is just that simple.
Yeah, it can be. Now, some people do inquire, and I think that's fun. That's happened numerous times down here since I moved. But even back home, man, pork, God, North Carolina, Central North Carolina, you can't hear it in my accent.
They love their pig.
Yeah, I used to be guilty, man. I used to throw that thing up there.
Right, hey, same, right? We were all there. And I think the family also, for a lot of people, the family can be the hardest. Fortunately, not for everybody. Some people have a rather mild experience with their family because, their family's just going to accept them how they are regardless. And really, that's how it should be. But for a lot of people, I know the introducing this to, the family is a very difficult matter, because now, especially if you've got kids involved. And so when grandparents want to be celebrating Christmas with their grandchildren, they're not going to get to, because grandchildren are not going to be doing Christmas. And, it brings up a lot of discussions that you never thought you'd have to have.
Yeah. That one will probably come up at some point in time in my life. But for the most part, my family's always supported me through a lot. They ask questions. They're concerned. They just don't want, losing faith. That's their biggest fear, losing faith. But I always tell them, like, it actually got stronger. And, they might not quite understand that at that point in time, but, and that's fine. But most of the time, we just leave it be and just have a few beers. So,
that's the way.
Yeah,
that's the alternate media way.
That's the preferred method. But not everybody is lucky enough to have that.
Right.
Like you said.
I think the initial phases of introducing it to the family, that at least that I'm aware of, that people that I know have experienced, and even I've had some of that experience myself, but not so much, just because my parents are the ones who led me into this. But the animosity and disappointment is sometimes a big thing, and that's kind of how it begins. Is first with a disappointment at the fact that you're leaving the family tradition, right? And that ultimately goes into the phase of arguments and antagonism, right? I know for some people there is an extreme problem of being gaslit by family members. It like intentionally either making a statement or asking a question that they know is going to start a dispute, and doing it intentionally. So, not so that the conversation will be had, but just so that they can say what they think they need to get off their chest and then end the conversation there.
Right. Yeah. I can definitely see a lot of that happening. But I think the biggest thing is just let them, because what's going to happen is obviously your life is going to change at this point. You don't need to bring it up to them. They're going to observe it. They're going to see it. And just let them ask the questions. And hopefully those questions come from trying to understand, rather than trying to, respond. That depends on which way that goes.
At a certain point, they're going to accept it, right? Nobody can fight that battle forever. And, at a certain point, they accept it. And that kind of leads into this weird, awkward phase, right? Because they're trying to accept it, but they don't know how to treat you. It's like they forgot how to be a family member, because you believe and practice things a little bit differently. There's a weird awkwardness, but eventually that I think leads into an acceptance, which things get a little more normal. They're still a little awkward, but they're a little more normal. And that may even lead into a level of alignment. They may even come around after that phase, but I think getting past the awkward phase where they finally given up and accepted that you are the way you are now.
Right. And I also think
hurdle.
if you have a level of conviction, they can do nothing but respect that. And then, because if you think about it, there's really nothing for them to go off on, like biblically speaking, on their behalf. I mean, they might have different traditions, stuff like that, but they're just like, wow, they really believe this. Maybe I need to check into it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
There's something to be had about having that level of conviction and just making it day by day.
And it's a beautiful opportunity to even share, right? Now, I know for some families, the hostility might be so much that they would never be willing to do this, but that's a beautiful opportunity to, invite them over for one of the feasts to experience what it's like to celebrate the feast. Passover is probably one of my favorite ones to invite new people over, who, maybe they don't agree fully, but they're curious. They're at least willing to see how this connects with the faith that they already espouse,
Right.
And that's that's at the very least a path to understanding and peace.
Yeah, and I think they can see the beauty in it as well. Once it's kind of presented that almost like, what, our teacher and who we claim as Messiah, he did all this. This is what he practiced. And he told us to follow them. And I think if they could just really think about that for a second and really give it some logical thought and not come from a place of emotion for the past, odd years they've been doing things the way they've been doing, I think they can have that realization. But that's tough in this day and age to do.
You're right. No, you're absolutely right.
It's not an easy feat to look in the mirror and just be like, you know what? I really didn't think about it that way. And I think if people just pause just for a second and just really kind of think it through, they'll kind of see, maybe I should be following and doing as he did, to the best of my ability. I'm not claiming perfection by any means.
Absolutely. And that kind of that I think the timing with that comes, especially when you reach the phase that you were just talking about, right? Knowing what you don't know. Is that's really where the humility hits, and it's easier to make peace at that point, at least on your end, right? It's very difficult to make peace with family who already disagree with you, and there's a little bit of animosity and vitriol between you when you're in the cage stage. When you're in the holier than thou stage, right? When you go beyond that and you reach that point of learning so much that you've learned that you know nothing.
Right. That's pretty much what it is. You're like, wow, I absolutely know nothing.
That's when I'd say the real adventure begins, because it is just constantly repeating itself. It's like you learn something new and it's awesome, and you look into it a little bit deeper, and the deeper you look, now you just have more questions, and you're learning more answers to those questions, and you see the wide scope of exactly how broad the wisdom of Hashem is. And it's like, wow, yeah, no, I know absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many angles you can take at it. I mean, my God. To try and understand it, people are going to see something a little bit different, but does it deem them wrong or right, from the standards that we want to work off of? So,
right.
Yeah.
You do learn to see a little bit more gray in certain areas. I think a lot of the reason, especially that, family, friends, and church members react the way they do to a lot of things, is because they grow up in a world, that's the world that we grew up in, right? But the more that you look and the more that you learn down this path, the more you learn that really not everything is such an extreme opposite. There is a little bit of gray in certain topics. There's a little bit of gray in certain areas where the subject itself is much more complex than just a yes or no answer.
Man, and that was the hardest thing for me to learn. I'm definitely a black and white type of guy. And whenever I was like, man, there is a lot of shade here. Like, I was like, I don't like this. But in a sense, I did like it. It was unique, and I don't know, it helped me be less harsher, if that's,
Mm-hmm.
when you're like, if you just see black and white and everything's that way, you're pretty harsh. And I know I can be. And from when I saw that and learned that, I was just like, okay, like, there is some shade here. Let's give some grace, like when we're talking to people,
Right.
and not be so like punch him in the throat, Patrick Swayze.
Yep. And so probably the final list of what to expect that I could think of. You've got your church and friends, you've got family, but what to expect from yourself. This is a difficult one for a lot of people starting out, is because I feel like a lot of people, first of all, they set expectations entirely too high for themselves,
Way
and
too high.
that can bring you way down. Look,
That's like discouragement stage. Like
yeah,
whenever you do that, yeah.
you're gonna forget things, right? Your first year of doing the week of unleavened bread, you are probably one day going to forget that it's the week of unleavened bread.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen because this is a totally new lifestyle you're taking on, right? And you're learning it as you go.
Yeah. Honestly, you got to give yourself room for mistakes. And don't set it so high. And I know you guys have said it multiple times. Start off simple. I don't think for that first year, I mean, I was with you guys, so obviously I did, but I probably wouldn't have if I didn't. I just started off by changing to the kosher and trying to do Sabbath.
Yep.
And all I did was light candles before, at evening, and then at the end, and that's all I did. No prayer yet. Just to get yourself into the routine. You start adding too much, it's discouraging. You're going to probably quit, and you're gonna be like, "Oh, this is too much." It can be because society is doing the opposite.
Right.
If you think everybody's doing everything on a Saturday, it's tough.
and it is, and even that, right, that comes with its own level of faith, because at a certain point you're probably going to eat something that you didn't know was not kosher, right?
Right.
A lot of people, they don't know that gelatin isn't kosher, so they may eat gelatin for like a whole year before discovering that that's not kosher. Like give yourself some grace there, right? You're learning. This is not something you grew up doing since childhood. It's not it's not your first nature. This is something that you're learning to do, and you can't beat yourself up too much for making these kind of mistakes.
And you're talking about 30 years. I started.
Right.
I was like, that's a lot of like rewiring you have to do, like just subconsciously going through the motions. And you have to just be more careful and more conscious about what you're doing, which is a good thing. That's the whole point, is to be more conscious and about what you're doing.
And the paranoia, and I almost hate to use that word because it comes from a good heart. But it gets to a point where, like, yeah, you are reading the label on the back of every can, on the back of every bag of like whatever it is. You might even just get an actual whole chicken from the store, but you read the back of that because you just don't know.
Yeah. So
what
just like,
is in the chicken?
It was like kielbasa for me, or like a chicken sausage.
Right.
And then like 2 months later, you're like, hey man, that's wrapped in pork case. And I was like, shut up. Like, is it? And I looked at it, I was like, sure enough, it is.
Yep. Yep.
Just destroyed my whole universe.
Man, it still gets me. One of my coworkers had introduced me to one of his favorite Thai dishes, and it was good. And it's beef, right? It's a beef stir fry, like it's basil stir fry, and it's just that with rice and an egg, and it was really good. And then I found out that like how to make that stir fry though involves fish sauce, which is just the collected juices from shellfish, and it was like, man, this sucks.
So disappointing. But I mean, like I say, just allow yourself some room, and that's what Acts 15 is about, right? You start slow and then you build up.
Right.
Don't go from 0 to 100 right off the bat. I mean, if you can do that, I mean, kudos to you. I couldn't. I mean, I remember you guys. We had that conversation. You're like, "Hey, man, just take it down a notch."
Right.
I was like, "All right, you guys are seasoned vets. You've been there. I'll do it."
Just chill. That's where even the Chabad movement, right? The Hasidics, their philosophy is like, hey man, pick one mitzvah, get really good at one, and when you think about it that way, that really, first of all, it illustrates the grace of Hashem, understanding that the endeavor to do better tomorrow is really what's central here. Right? You can only do as well as you can do today, and you don't need to put too much pressure on yourself about that. But as long as you endeavor to do better tomorrow, and then the next day you endeavor to do a little bit better then, right? It's a constant process of becoming the best version of yourself that you can be for Hashem. It doesn't happen overnight.
And it's about climbing that ladder. You might not be where somebody else might be, but they've been doing it for their whole life. You might have had a further like travel distance up that ladder because you started late. You had to go through a whole lot more like routine. You had to break through routines, traditions, and that's not easy to do. I mean, it's not easy to disassociate, especially if you have to, from family, friends. Granted, I hope that, God forbid, I hope it never comes to that ever. And I hope that y'all can reconcile and work around that. But, it's not easy stuff when it comes to making that decision.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, like I said, I think most families, if they're truly loving, they will understand. And then it gets easier.
And part of it's interesting, like you said, the analogy with the ladder, right? You might have a long way to climb. And it may not seem like it's making progress at first. One example that I take out of C.S. Lewis's book, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, there's a certain part where the God figure of the story, the lion, is speaking to this child who has been magically morphed into a dragon. And he essentially tells him you need to bathe right in this lake here, and he says, but first you must undress, right? Which is essentially the idea of peeling the skin of the dragon off so that he's a boy again. But that's always the first part, right? Before you can bathe yourself and become clean, you have to get undressed, and that ultimately comes out in the form of what I say is shedding off Christianity in many ways, because what you're shedding off is a lot of traditions and stuff that are not in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of has to come before a point of starting to insist upon and demand certain standards of practice from yourself, right? You have to learn how to not do before you learn how to do.
Right.
And I mean, and we see that in Acts too, because most of what the 4 prohibitions, what they're being told is what not to do, right? That's the 4 that they're given before they can learn what they should do.
Right.
So
I mean, those 4 prohibitions allow them to hang out, essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And another thing to look out for in the early stages is bad teachers.
Oh man, yes.
It's the Torah practicing movement is so fractured right now, because a lot of people find what they esteem to be, and this goes into the not realizing that you don't know anything, right?
Right.
They figure that
Yeah.
they've learned a lot, and then they find this other teacher who seems to know more than they do, so they must really know because I know more than the Christians at the church that I used to go to, and they know more than me, so they really know.
I wasn't gonna say anything like that. I was gonna let you bring that up, but that's usually that pivotal stage, like where that holier and thou stage, cage stage. But yeah, that's usually where that comes out, and you really have to be careful on who you learn from. Um, I mean, one thing that like you guys do very well, man, you have topics with everybody, atheists, Christians, practicing members of Judaism, whatever it is. I mean, you're not afraid to have that talk. And for the most part, most of these talks are very well respectful. I mean, there might have been one or two like debates, but for the most part, like that's awesome, man. That's just everybody trying to come together to learn and understand, and really, that's what I mean. That's kind of what it's all about, is trying to make yourself better.
Right. This is a way we can connect with other human beings also, and that's, that in and of itself is part of Torah study, especially my students of Tanya out there. You guys know that part of Torah study is what they call oral Torah study, which is not necessarily the study of the oral Torah, but it's orally discussing the Torah and the things of the Torah with other people. And, obviously, if you read through the Talmud, you're going to find that a number of rabbis have disagreed over time. I mean, that's, the old saying, where there's two Jews, there's three opinions and four synagogues.
And
you know,
that's another thing is like, I know there's a lot of people that are bent on like not reading rabbinic literature, and like, but why wouldn't you? Even if you don't agree with everything in there, like there's so much that's enlightening that Jesus taught from there. I'm like, wow, he taught, like, this is talking about this in the Talmud, in the Everman's Talmud book that I have. I was like, wow, this expounded on that. It's quite eye opening.
I would say that's one of the last. There are a few, again, going back to the idea of shedding off Christianity. There are a few garments that some people never shed, and because it's very hard to shed those. And we had this conversation. I remember when we had this conversation. But this idea that because the Jews rejected Jesus, that means they're wrong inherently about everything.
Right.
That's one of those garments, and that's one of the very last garments to shed. I know for myself, it was one of the last garments that I shed, and some people just never get to the point where they shed that garment. They hold on to that.
And you can't categorize a whole people.
No,
like, you just can't do it. Like, you're talking about a few, and you're talking about like Rome in that situation. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like, there's a lot of players in that. And you can't just be like, hey, just we're gonna blame this whole. You can't Kanye West it.
Oh man, yeah, no, that, and another aspect of that too is like, I tell people, and this may sound, heretical to, whatever Christians may be watching, and, I've been called a heretic a number of times already anyway. But the subject of Jesus is literally just one subject. The Bible covers so many others that it's ridiculous to assume that the Jews have been wrong about every single one of those because you think that they were wrong about one subject.
Yeah.
It's a bad argument.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the denominations that came from Protestant, like that whole Reformation. It's like you all have different, but you consider each other Christian. So it frustrates me on that end, because you literally have that, but you accept the other person, even though you might disagree on this part. They're wrong about one thing, which y'all agree about everything else. The same thing.
And you can have peaceful discourse between them.
Yeah.
Oh, but in In any case, yeah, the summary there, I think, is definitely don't, if you're new to this and starting down this path, definitely don't be too hard on yourself.
No.
Just anticipate and expect that there's some things you're going to get wrong, right? Because you are in a phase where you really don't know anything. You've learned a little bit. You've at least learned that Torah is still valid via reasoning with the New Testament and the Old Testament together collectively. But that's not a point of understanding enough to expect yourself to have a perfect observance. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. And ask questions. That's the whole point. Like, I know in some Christianity circles, they tell you not, like, you should be asking those questions. You should just believe it.
Right.
But you should be asking those questions. You have a right to know. I mean, that's why you have the faculties to ask it.
Right. And that's, well, here at Alternate Media, that's what we encourage the most, right? Is to ask the questions. Because we may not always like the answers. And the answers may not always be 100% correct, but at least asking is going to put you in a position where you can learn. Because if you don't ask, you'll never learn.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's 100% true. And my last thing, I don't know if we're about to wrap up or not, but I would say when having discussions, ask questions to those people and let them ask you questions back. But I would say you might want to depart whenever it gets you get a personal attack, because that usually comes too.
Yeah.
You might want to detach and just be like, all right, like, I'm not going to entertain this. We're done.
There's a time to step away peacefully before it turns into an argument. And that's especially one to practice, especially
it's not easy.
on Shabbat, especially, right? Because it's considered kindling a fire, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So you don't kindle a fire on Shabbat. So you try and avoid what will probably turn into a heated argument, right? Or a discussion of vitriol. To have, I think, a scriptural debate, as long as it stays peaceful, that's probably fine. But at the point at which anger is kindled, that would technically be igniting a flame on Shabbat, and that's Talmudic.
Yeah. Oh.
But we can definitely at this point open the chat for questions, especially since we've got a new face. Everybody, you're finally meeting.
I'll do my best.
Seeing the face of other members of the staff. Ask away.
Yeah, I'll do my best. There's no promises. Might have to defer it. Oh.
So I noticed that you've got like the way upgraded version of the mic that I'm using. I don't know if anybody who's been watching has been noticing, but his mic looks a lot like mine, except that it changes color because it's way cooler.
Yeah, I mean, it was your recommendation, and I was just like, you know what? Let's just stick it to the man. Oh,
absolutely,
man. But I think another thing I wrote down was like sources. I think y'all guys are a great source, obviously. But I would test everything with, you can test everything with scripture, but also, Deuteronomy 13 lays out a fine details of how to test what's right and what's wrong, coming in and coming out, like the sources that you listen to or read. I think Daniel 7:25 is another one.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the popular ones both of those that I like to especially use. And I remember, you were here for the conversation that I had with those Mormons.
Oh yeah, I was sitting right next to you.
And when we brought up Deuteronomy 13, and kind of where that applies to Joseph Smith, they were like, well, whoa, that's a good point.
Well, to be fair, one of them leaned back and he was like, I want to get out of here. That's about what that looked like. The other guy leaned in and he was like, I don't know what that says. And he opened it and read it and he was like, oh. And that's about like where he kind of sped up the conversation and was like, we need to get out of here. It was definitely a very interesting, hour, 2? And they're there for a while.
Oh, here we got a question. I think Seamus answered it in the chat, but this you can tell other people. What did you get your doctor in? Why are you
Proctology.
Dr. Scott?
Proctology. I'm kidding.
Yep.
Chiropractor. I used to be a school teacher. A lot of people don't know that about me, but I used to teach school for about 3 years. That's kind of also why I like the Torah observing community. A lot of people I know is homeschool.
Yes.
I feel like that's the right move.
Homeschool.
We won't go too much into that, but just being in the public schools, I was like, I see where this is going. But now, yes, I'm a chiropractor. So that's where the doctor comes from.
Ooh, this is a good one. All right. What's your biggest piece of advice to those who have less than 3 years into Torah?
Man, that is tough. I guess it depends on what stage you're in, because this could take a while. But I would say be patient. Be slow to respond, but slow to respond, but quick to understand. Especially when you're having discussions with people, because a lot of conversations I see, they always feel like you didn't understand them and where they're coming from. So I usually kill them with questions. That way I have a basis of what they're going off of, and they can't backtrack either. But I would definitely say be patient with yourself. Ask questions as when they come into your mind, write them down if you can't get to anybody. But definitely ask all the questions, even if they're tough. I mean, that's what we have the Discord for. You have we have an amazing Discord community, and people can answer questions there.
Absolutely. No, yeah, we have such a great Discord community that it is so self-functioning at this point that half the time Seamus and I don't actually have to be involved.
I don't remember the last time I responded. Honestly, like, I mean, I've been in the our chat, but in group, man, there's so many people with vast amounts of knowledge. Like, I'm learning from them.
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, I would
the small stuff.
Exactly. I don't know if that answered the question or the answer that you're looking for, but I would definitely say just be patient overall with yourself and with others. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, definitely. And that falls into, I would definitely say, don't sweat the small stuff. Falls into that being patient with yourself. You know, you can feel stunted, or maybe like you're not going anywhere, but even there, you have to be patient with yourself, because some of us have to go through a desert. Not everybody goes through a desert, but some of us do, and it's a learning experience. There's nothing you can do to get yourself out of it, because that's where Hashem intends for you to be in that moment, and you'll be out of it when He is ready for you to be out of it.
And start small.
Absolutely. Yeah. Bite-sized pieces. And since we mentioned our Discord community, I'll go ahead and throw up here. This is our shout out, as tradition, to our Talmudim and scholars, our top tier Patreon supporters. We really couldn't do this without you guys. All of you, all of our Patreon supporters. Incredible community. They're so active in the Discord server, and so my parents have been in this as long as I have, but obviously being older, they've had more experience than I as a younger kid could have, and even they are just mind blown by not only how receptive the Discord community is, but how genuinely curious people are. I mean, it seems foreign to them because of the experience that they had coming out of the church. So meeting people as wonderful as the people that we have as our supporting base is like a foreign experience sometimes. And we want to let you guys know you guys are beautiful and we love you.
Absolutely.
We also have our meme of the week. This one, and this one was terrific because this is exactly what it is like. Let's see. Yeah, when you tell people what the Bible really says.
And it's that many people attacking you. I'm not.
Yeah.
Yes.
It just comes from all sides. So yeah, Yehoshua, you're our meme lord for the week.
You know what? Coming back from that meme, honestly, I think if you ask the logical question, if the path is narrow and the gate is narrow, and modern Christianity is all over the place, like it's the majority. The logical question asked, and this is a question I've asked myself, and maybe a question that I haven't really answered, but I mean, is that gate narrow if it's the majority all over the world?
Absolutely.
I don't know if that's just a thought that I had getting on here, and it's very interesting thing to think about.
Here's a good question. What if you find yourself questioning Messiah? So this is something that happens. A lot of people they come out of this and they'll especially be exposed to teachers like Tovia Singer, which we did an episode on last week, and they will initially begin to question Messiah based on things that Tovia Singer says. Now, I would actually say that part of the cure to that is to, well, again, read the Talmud for yourself, because that is how you'll find out where Tovia Singer is being intellectually dishonest in his arguments. And definitely reach out to someone else. If it's something that you are questioning, reach out to another teacher and, like you say, ask the questions. Right? Because doubt is only going to grow. It'll take root and it'll just keep growing. If you don't ask, if you don't put it out there where it's accessible to somebody else to help.
And that's a good question, because I've been through that one, like where you just have that doubt. And so but like you said, you ask the questions, you start looking at it, and you start seeing it from a different point of view. So
here's an interesting one too. Do you think that when our soul leaves Hashem and enters our body, it already has a personality? I would say yes, but some of my research and understandings pertaining to a more Kabbalistic view of the creation and the nature of God, where the soul comes from and why it works that way, would play directly into this. So maybe not a full personality, but it has its bents and its natures. There are things about people that have no explanation. They just are, right? Why do some people have an affinity for music and others don't? I mean, everybody likes music, but there are musicians that music really is their life. They don't really have anything outside of that animates them as a being. Why is that? Well, there's no answer for that. Just are. It's just part of who they were when they separated from Hashem and became an individual, right? When they entered the body, when they became an individual soul. That's just part of who they were. It's part of the nature of Hashem that is in them.
I would almost say yes and no. From just the deep thought, and you obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't you get another part of that through the body?
Certainly.
You know where I'm going. You know where I'm going with this, right?
No, yeah. There's naturally there's affinities that the body has just by nature of the fact that it is a body,
Right.
So yeah, no, certainly I could see that. So yeah, maybe it is a bit of a yes and no. It really depends on what we're talking about. We're talking about the nefesh or the neshama.
Exactly. Yeah. So I almost say yes and no, but that was something I have to read on more. For sure.
Yep. Too smart for your own good, brother.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, but We're 5 minutes over time now, so it is time to close out. Again, we thank you all for coming and joining us. For anybody who is a newcomer, I understand for our regulars who have been in this walk for a while, this may have been a boring episode. Thank you for bearing with us through that. If you are a newcomer, definitely thank you for joining, and we hope that this has helped you. If you want to see more content like this, definitely hit the like and subscribe button. Ring that bell for us.
There you go.
And Scott, before we close out, do you want to do the honors?
What honors am I doing here?
Well, I usually do a l'chaim, before we head over to the after parties, which is where we will be, right? In the after parties.
I'm going to let you do the honors.
Okay.
I'm gonna let the seasoned vet do it.
All right. But yeah, definitely. If you do want to join us in the after parties, it's a special privilege for our supporters. You can join the Discord and jump in a private chat with us after the show and ask us questions, talk about tonight's episode, roast us. Again, nobody has roasted me, and this has to change. Somebody's got to roast me. I understand it's part of the roast is that I'm not being roasted, but I don't like that.
So, that part of the roast as well? You don't like it?
Right. Anyway, we thank you all for joining, and hopefully we will see you all in the after parties in a bit. L'chaim.